Cool.
This meeting is being recorded.
Good morning, Professor Tootle.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm doing really well, thank you. Got a busy morning though, so we probably won't go more than an hour today, which is, heck, we probably shouldn't go more than an hour anytime. But so it's very nice to see you. Hey, you're not wearing a white T-shirt, is that you're in gray zone today?
Yeah, how about that? It's a great T-shirt day. Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. Well, I'm all in black. I don't know what that means.
Yeah.
So Professor, here's what I'm hoping you are going to do today is give some guidance to American citizens on how bent out of shape, and actually the answer is no, so that was easy conversation, but how bent out of shape we should be over presidential politics. Like day in and day out, because if you look at Friends and what we talk about in the nightly news, it seems like there's going to be something about the presidential election probably every day for, 16 months or something. And I'm not sure that's healthy for good citizenship. I think we all should pay some attention, but I'm not sure we should pay all the attention. So we can talk about some corollary things today, but what I'd like you to do is give some insights into past presidential elections. And yes, we should talk about this one a little bit. The reason I wanted to talk about it this week is, of course, former President Trump has announced, and this week, current President Biden has announced. And so clearly they're both the front runners, but it sure seems unusual to me. And that's why you're going to tell us about some other unusual or interesting things in perspective of what citizens should be thinking about. We're not journalists, and we're not, I guess you're a history professor, and yes, I'm an occasional columnist, but we're not the decision makers. We're just people. And what should other people be thinking about? It seems to me to be unusual to have the Attorney General's designee interview a potential presidential candidate who is a former vice president, who's in a criminal investigation against a former president. And that person was appointed by a Supreme Court justice because he didn't get to be on the U.S. Supreme Court from the current president against the past president. That to me just seems like really unusual stuff. Does that happen every time there's a president and campaigns? And to me, it seems like we're in semi-uncharted territory with all these insiders in criminal proceedings against presidents. That seems to be unusual. So let's start there, and then let's go to Washington, and then let's figure out what else is in between that we should think about. Fair enough?
Sure.
Cool. So start there. Is this unusual times or no, John? This happens all the time. You're just not paying attention.
Yes, it's unusual. There's really nothing. There's really nothing like it. I guess you might have some the weird. I mean, I guess the closest analogy. Yes, it's unusual. There's really nothing. There's really nothing like it. I guess you might have some. Why is my audio playing? The weird. I mean, I guess
I don't know. It's fascinating. You have a beautiful look. You kind of look like Tucker Carlson,
really
Professor.
Yeah, I'm not sure what. There's really nothing like it. I don't know whether I should start talking or not. Something's happening. Okay, let me start over.
Totally. Okay, and let me just step in. I tried to go live on YouTube. It was an experiment, and it went a little funky, so I backed out of going live on YouTube. So that's
okay.
Thank you.
Well, at least we know it wasn't deep state. So that was nice to tell us what's going on, Tony.
I think actually it gave me more time to think about this. Probably one of the weirder times where you could say something was kind of this weird would be either when Andrew Johnson was running for president in his own right, and he had almost been impeached and tried to manipulate Ulysses S. Grant into kind of supporting the thing that eventually led to his impeachment, and then of course Grant ends up winning the presidency. So that was something that was a little weird. The other thing that might be a little weird in that regard would be the 1912 election, where you have Theodore Roosevelt running against his vice president, who was also the president, William Howard Taft. But nothing, like I said, I guess the Andrew Johnson might be the closer analogy, but it's nothing like today, because I mean, for it to be the same, it would be like if the ghost of Andrew Jackson was running against Andrew Johnson, and I just there's nothing like what's happening this year. I mean, I saw something the other day where since the 1990s, basically at post George W. Bush, other than Obama, every candidate for office was born in the 1940s, which is pretty weird. And it gets even weirder when you remember the fact that we're in the 2023 right now, and these people were all born in the 1940s. That if Biden wins office, I think he'll be something like 86 when he leaves. I mean, an almost 90-year-old, and it's just incredibly bizarre. So you are correct in your assessment that this is a weird time.
Well, I think it's kind of neat for a student, a citizen student, to kind of think through that all three branches of government are right involved in this. I mean, it didn't go to the Supreme Court, but it went to an appellate court. And the day after, I don't even know how that works, maybe you do, the day after the appellate court ordered that Pence can testify, Jack Smith, I think he said, I think it's the guy, the special prosecutor or whatever he's called, had him in 8 hours, 6 hours of testimony the next day. I mean, what do you do? Call him up and go, hey, Mike, can you come on down? I mean, didn't he have a lunch meeting or something? I mean, he's running for president. I mean, and so you got all three branches of government in one day and two presidential candidates. Again, to me, it seems stunning to me. Am I?
Yeah, but also remember that every presidential election in its own way it's always historic. It's always different than the last one. And it's always, weird for its own reason. So in some regard, you should expect some of this stuff to be unique to every election season. But
okay, let me challenge you on that. What are the 6, say, out of how many presidential contests we've had? What are the 6 ones that no one has ever studied? It wasn't in high school. You don't teach it. I mean, the answer is there's a ton of boring presidential elections that just don't make the cut. I mean, we can talk about Lincoln and Washington and FDR and Kennedy and Clinton, I guess. I mean, in our era, we think it's unique because we've been alive and we remember some oddity. But there's a lot of elections that really weren't that interesting. I know there were an election, but there was no history.
I just totally disagree with that.
Cool. So give us a history lesson on presidential politics.
Yeah, I would say the reason we think of some of those elections and that history as being boring was because of a deliberate effort to downplay the importance of the presidency during that era as part of a rewriting of American history by Southerners to erase the political history from that era. What we think of as the boring era in American politics is usually from in between Lincoln and Theodore Roosevelt, and I always point out that between 1860 and 1932, that's a 72-year period. Right. And is it a coincidence that during this period when people want to make the argument that we shouldn't pay attention to politics and nothing happened during that 72-year period, that's a 72-year period where you only have 2 Democratic presidents? You only have Woodrow Wilson, who was elected because of the split in the Republican Party in World War, and you have Grover Cleveland, who was elected to non-consecutive terms and probably and wouldn't have won those elections if it weren't for voter suppression of Black people in the South. So during the, we shouldn't look at this 72-year period and say, or I guess I would say, we should look at this 72-year period and ask ourselves, why does one group of people, or I should say two groups of people, really not want us to study the political history of the United States during that period? And why do they downplay the presidency and political history so much during this one period? And
so Professor, I concur. This resonates with what you're saying. I have a high school diploma. I have an undergraduate degree in political science. I have a Juris Doctorate in law. I don't know anything about that period of history. So am I a victim, or is it we just had lousy culture that allowed the schools not to teach important things because we'd offend somebody?
No, it was because of the deliberate wiping of American history in order to rewrite the period of Reconstruction. And there were two groups of historians that kind of dominated the profession. And the easiest way to lie about something is to just ignore it. I sometimes point out, back, when I first started teaching, I would sometimes point out that there were no scholarly biographies of Ulysses S. Grant. No, I mean, now there are, but they've all been published in the last 20 years. When I was finishing grad school, the only book on Grant's presidency was written by a guy named William Heseltine, who was mostly famous for being Stephen Ambrose's advisor. And Stephen Ambrose was kind of a famous historian. He wrote Undaunted Courage. And that book was published in 1936. So it was like nobody was studying any of the political history. And we didn't even refer to this era as having politics. The way it's still taught in school today is, there were a bunch of robber barons building railroads. And
I remember that in junior high school.
Steel titans, and you study Carnegie and Rockefeller and people like that, but you don't study the people who are actually, running the country. And it's on purpose, because the things that those presidents valued were things that that two groups of historians were hostile towards.
Professor, make sure I think you're getting to a conclusion to make sure I understand, but it does seem like you're talking about not cancel culture, but you're talking about revisionist history. I mean, kind of current topics of the day, but it doesn't sound like it's the current way we're talking about current topics. It almost sounds like the reverse. I'm confused.
Well, I guess I was just trying to answer this question of why do we think this period is boring? And the reason we think it's boring is because nobody studied it. It wasn't boring. It was everything that we think of as being exciting happened during this period.
Well, so make sure you answer the two types that made us not understand it, and then start to go into that.
I don't know if you think that Kennedy was popular, well, and the assassination was interesting. Well, McKinley was more popular, and he was assassinated, and Garfield was popular, and he was assassinated. And I don't know. You think the struggle for civil rights is not interesting? I don't know. If you find studying the freedom rides interesting, why wouldn't you find it interesting the crushing of the Klan? If you find it interesting to study, HBO has a series on the Tulsa massacre, but why not study the Colfax massacre that was 10 times bigger and way more violent?
So I'm not certain, but is it possible that I've never heard of the Colfax massacre?
It's probably, yeah, of course. It's entirely possible, but you should have studied the Colfax massacre.
Is this ring a bell to you, Professor, that when everybody started talking about the Tulsa massacre in the last 5 years, it seemed like it became really popular, at least in my circles.
Yeah.
I can't tell you the amount of people, black and white, they would just say, I didn't know that. I wasn't taught that. And now you're telling me there's something else. I don't know. Bart and Tony, are you aware of the Colfax massacre? Is that just part of your daily language?
I'm assuming it happened, in Denver on Colfax, based on what you're saying, but I don't know anything about it. I've never heard of it.
You've never heard of it either. How about you, Bart? Are you still with us?
Yes, I'm right here. I have never heard of it either.
So,
Yeah.
Professor, talk to me. What I'm actually now confused because I thought we would talk about the campaigns
Yeah,
of Lincoln
right.
and Washington and
Right.
FDR. Now
Well,
you're getting in a whole new. I didn't even know we'd be talking about this today.
Well, we should actually maybe, what we should probably do is like have a separate show just on the Colfax massacre and invite somebody who's a real specialist on it to come and give us the lowdown. But I mean, or I can, in a pinch, but my only point was that there's a lot of political history out there that people don't know about, and thus assume it is boring, but it's not boring. And it's kind of like I'm always embarrassed when I hang out with somebody who's a Russian historian, because no matter what I talk about, they'll say, oh, there's this thing that happened in Russia that was 1,000 times bigger and you just don't know about it. And it does turn out that there are these events that took place during what we call the Gilded Age or Progressive Era that simply are wiped from our collective memory. And it's interesting, Anthony just put into the comment, to the victor goes the spoils, not in this case, which is, I think is a good reminder that like elite institutions have an outsized importance when it comes to the creation of our kind of national memory, because you're talking about, you would say like, well, the Republican Party in the late 19th century was never more powerful than it was then. And you wouldn't even say they didn't have money. They had more money and more powerful rich people than at any other time. So, and they had just won the Civil War. So you say, how is it possible when they had all the political power, all of the money, they could have, if you were simply trying to point this arrow and say, the winners write the history? No, they don't. Because in the case of the Gilded Age and Progressive Era, the late 19th century, it was not the winners who wrote the history books. It was the people who cared about it more. And the people who cared about it more were progressives who believed that they wanted to try to control these forces of modernity that were, the real thing that society should be grappling with, and racists who were trying to rewrite the history of the United States in the Civil War. And they cared.
So those are the two types that an unholy alliance that caused this.
Yeah.
Racists and progressives, historical progressives.
Yeah, I mean, generally, yeah. But
So
anyway, we can get back to presidential politics. We're really far afield from.
yeah, but I'm just really kind of surprised that the more you know, the more you don't know. How's that for a quote? And so if it wasn't for these series of conversations, I guess I shouldn't be surprised that I don't know a ton anymore.
Well, I just like when you say Rutherford B. Hayes, what's the only thing you know about Rutherford B. Hayes?
Well, in that instance, besides he has a beard, nothing.
Yeah, well, I always say the bearded presidents. That's how you can tell who the Democrats were. They were the only two who didn't have beards. So Grover, if you want to know, it's really easy. All the Republicans had beards, and Democrats although Grover Cleveland had a mustache, But if you knew anything about Rutherford B. Hayes, you would say, oh, it was Rutherford B. Hayes, right? And the stolen election of 1876. And he sold out Reconstruction, or, he sold out Black people and the corrupt bargain and all this. And it's just a complete distortion of his entire life was dedicated to civil rights issues, abolitionism, and then Black education. And he had a fascinating life, and a fascinating presidency where he was doing everything he could to try to preserve Black political rights. And it was very difficult, but I don't think a fair-minded person would say that was extremely boring or that it was his fault. Sometimes in politics you lose. So anyway, just my rant about the late 19th century, but those elections were important. And here's the other thing. Let me just make another plug for the late 19th century. This is the high point for voter participation in all of American history.
Really?
Yeah.
But still they had horses and stuff. How would you vote when you can't get to the polling place? Didn't they have to work? Didn't they have to farm or work? Or didn't they have to raise children? Or, well, I guess raising children is a different issue. But
so the presidents who were winning elections in the late 19th century were the most popular politicians in American history, because they were winning more votes when more people were voting than at any other time. And by that metric, you would say like William McKinley might be the most popular president in American history, maybe.
I don't even know where to go on this now.
Yeah,
honest.
Sorry. So I'm just saying, like, there are fascinating elections, and everyone has their own sort of twists and turns and compromises, and each one is unique in and of itself, and you never quite know what's going to happen, and then people try to create models off of it, and they're wrong.
So let me go back to not my premise, just context of this conversation from my perspective, not from yours, from my perspective. I want more people to be engaged in our political system, but in the right way, in a way that can bring them meaning and value, in the way that they're contributing to themselves and their family and their community and our nation. I want them to make a powerful difference, even if they disagree with me. I want them to not do the trite or the easy or the lazy or the actually the contradictory. They say stuff that actually may be irritating more people than they're pleasing. They may be good for their small tribe, but they're not moving society forward in the long term. And so I kind of think we've got misplaced priorities of let's all pay attention to the presidential election. Why we're ignoring local governments and state governments and governors and all the other stuff that's going on. We pay more attention this way. So now you're telling me that citizens were more active 100 years ago.
Absolutely.
And so, well, gosh, they didn't have the quality of life we have. They didn't have the ability to travel and the ability to own as many books and the ability to have as many friends. And they were working for a living. And so I'm just plain confused by all this. What lessons should we learn from our ancestors on this? How do we take a historian's approach to what's important and go, aha, because you're giving me some, but I'm not sure that's going to resonate because you and I really know each other. What can the average citizen think about? Do they all have to read a book on every president of the United States to be a good citizen? The answer is, of course, not. But what should we do? What give us some things to ponder?
I would say, if you're a regular person, set aside 45 minutes of your life.
A week?
No, just 45 minutes.
No, total.
Just tell yourself, I'm going to spend 45 minutes and I'm going to find out the following things. In my state, do I have to be a member of a political party in order to vote in the primaries of political parties? In other words, do you have to be a Republican in order to vote in the Republican primary? Do you have to be a Democrat in order to vote in the Democratic Party? Or do how does my state nominate candidates? And then the next thing I would do is I would say, investigate everyone who is qualified to be nominated in your state. And these are things that you can find out in 45 minutes. And then the final piece of advice I would give is no matter what.
Are you talking about for president or for any?
President. I'm talking about for president.
Yeah, good.
and then I would say,
By the
do-
way, Professor, sorry to interrupt you, but do you know that I don't know that answer in Colorado? The first one I do. Second one I don't. I don't know what it takes. I know I have a wacky friend of mine, and I hope he doesn't listen to this show, but he lives a couple miles away from me, and he's on the some weird name party, and he ran for president last time. It took him a couple $100 or a couple hundred signatures. I can't remember which, but one or the
Yeah.
other. I don't think it was both. And he was on the ballot. He was one of like 16 presidential candidates in Colorado. So yeah, I have a sense that it's not too hard, at least in Colorado. But I don't know actually what it is. You actually want people to know what it takes to run for president in their state.
yeah, and
Sure.
who and whether or not you can vote for them when they're being nominated. you
Yeah.
know.
Oh, well, nominate. And so those small parties, who knows though? I mean, you probably have to go to the little meeting or something.
Yeah,
Huh.
but in general, can you vote to help nominate either the Democrat or the Republican in your state?
Right.
And who, sort of, how do you get on the, how do these people get on the ballot, right? And then I would say the final piece that can be accomplished in 45 minutes is decide that you are going to vote in the primary. And in the primary, vote for the person you think would make the best president. And you can do that in 45 minutes. I don't think that's too big of an ask for the average citizen. And if everybody did that, we would have a much better political system.
Well, no, it would be an astronomical change because I don't know what the turnout in primaries in other states are. I assume it's pretty modest. In Colorado, it's a little higher because every unaffiliated can vote. In fact, we get it mailed to our home. We can choose. Sorry to spoil it for Colorado people listening to this, but you can mail it to your home as long as you're registered to vote. You get a ballot. You get to choose the R or D. Send it back.
Right.
Now you got to do the other one, which would be better for president. But I think Colorado's an outlier. I think most states, you got to be an R or a D, and you got to be at a certain amount of time before the election, and then you got to go down and do it. You can't do it in person. It's not by mail, or it's not in mail. It's hard, and so hardly anyone votes.
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. Set aside 45 minutes of your life and figure that out.
But it'd be revolutionary, though, if 330 million Americans minus people under 18 and felons or whatever the rule is.
Yeah.
If it's not that 45 minutes, it would be revolutionary.
Yep. That's my point.
No, I mean, really, no, revolutionary.
Yeah. That's why I said it doesn't seem like too big of an ask, but it would be revolutionary if everybody did that. I mean, you asked, that's my answer.
Yeah, but I haven't read an article. Did you read about that in the Wall Street Journal or something on how to make a positive difference in society? Did you
No.
Did you make this up just now?
I made it up when you asked me the question.
Yeah, but there's not a column on this. I could write a column. No one.
Yeah.
Have you read a treatise on this?
You write it. You write it up in Denver, and I'll share it.
But has there been did the Atlantic write about this, or did the New York Times, or? But I mean, it's actually is a fairly rational request. When I said 45 minutes a week, I mean that was or maybe a month. I don't know. That seems rational for a citizen. You're saying 45 minutes in their lifetime, or just to do it once.
Well, I would say once per every 4 years.
Yeah, and the law might change, right? Sure.
Yeah, or really, I mean, if I could push a little further, maybe once every 2 years.
Yeah, sure.
45 minutes every 2 years is, I think, pretty light lifting.
Yeah. Bart and Tony, I'm a little astounded. Do you think I'm just having a weird day, or does this conversation intrigue you?
I'm always intrigued by a conversation, but yes, this intrigues me because it's pretty simplistic stuff, but I didn't know a lot of the answers to what you're talking about and what's going on until I started doing it myself. Like I went to, I experienced how we nominated, say, a president. We all got in our caucus and did it. And I was like, oh, that's how that happens? Wow, that's amazing. That was easy and simple and weird, And then, I volunteered to run the polls so that I could see how did people sign up and everything. And then last election, I was the ballot police. So I was picking up ballot boxes and taking them back to, the election. And I was like, wow, this is the process, right here. So.
And by the way, this is full disclosure, because we don't talk about this much. Professor Tootle is still a Republican.
Yep.
I was a lifelong Republican, and I've been unaffiliated for 8 years. And I'll bet you're a registered Democrat. Or are you unaffiliated, Tony? What are you?
I've been unaffiliated since Gore was a horrible human being. So that's what.
Well,
and
that's a different story. But you vote Democratic.
No,
Don't
sir.
mislead us.
No, sir. No, sir. I do not vote a Democrat ticket. I vote the best candidate. And on occasion,
You sure seem like a liberal to me.
I know. I thought I was a liberal until I came and hung out with you guys. I'm like, wow.
Well, now all we need is another couple $100 million to listen to our conversations.
Yeah.
All right. Sorry to do a side thing, Professor. Do you have any, or Bart? Do you want to
Well,
weigh
I
in
was
on
going
that?
to say, what's Bart? I don't know what Bart's politics are.
I'm not sure I do either. Bart, are you still with us?
You don't have to.
Yes,
confess,
I'm right
but-
here. Yeah, no, I'm right here. I've been unaffiliated in Colorado since, my God, about 1998.
Yeah, but that was because it
Um,
was your job to write laws, and you didn't want legislators to look you up.
Well, that was true. That is true. I'm a lot like Tony. I probably lean liberal, especially on social issues, stuff like that. But
Yeah,
I
but
try to vote for the
I'm a
best people.
conservative and lean that way on social issues. So who's right on that one? We should talk about that someday.
Well,
Probably another podcast.
I just want to say, I think Bart's right. That's what I want to say.
Yeah. But one of the things that has happened in a lot of places in the country is that as people are abandoning, it's kind of similar. There's something also that tends to happen in religion, which is that as moderates flee, you get this self-reinforcing echo chamber existence where it actually then becomes more radicalized, which then causes more people to flee. And then you have, in essence, only the hardcore radicals choosing the nominees. And because of the difficulty of getting ballot access, and how it is usually restricted to the two major parties, it means that we're getting less and less qualified presidents who are, in essence, more and more unacceptable to the vast majority of Americans. I think
So I want to push back on that, and then we'll go back to history. He's not my stripe of politician, but Mike Pence is a respectable, thoughtful, I'd say moral, competent guy. He's not my stripe at all. I would never vote for him, but still, I think he's credible. I think he's representative of a mass swath of American society. Agree or disagree?
agree.
Cool. Same with
Hold on, just a second. All right, so you're talking about Pence, the guy who won't be alone with a woman, represent most of.
Yeah, but and boy, that's a
Come
whole.
on, dude. What the hell?
That is okay. That is a whole show unto itself, and it's politically incorrect to agree with him. But I'm telling you, there is some.
I'm just, let me limit my.
Thank you.
Just on the spectrum of normal.
Yeah, he's on
You
the
know,
spectrum
like,
of moral.
He is not an abnormal radical politician. He exists on the spectrum of what we would consider like normal politics.
Thank you. And by the way, Tony, including your dig against him. When I first heard that, I thought that was loony bin. And in today's society, I think that's actually probably pretty rational.
Absolutely.
I can tell you as a professor, the first thing they tell you when you start graduate school is never be alone with a female student. Like it's literally like, I mean,
and in today's world, Professor, I'm not sure it matters. I'm not sure you should ever be alone.
I think you're
yeah,
right.
and I can tell you that, from the time I taught my first class in the fall of 1998, I've never been alone with a student.
So, okay, thank you. A student, not just a female student. A
I've
student.
never
You should never touch a student.
I've never touched
never
it.
touched
The
a
only
student.
time I ever have touched a student would be when often when they're during their graduation, when their parents are taking a picture, I will sometimes do that, but that's it. You know, that if
So,
once
so
if
Tony,
your
we just
mom
beat
and
the
dad are
heck out of
taking
you there. I know
pictures-
this is a conversation on presidential politics. We just beat the heck out of you. Do you take your comment back?
Absolutely
About
not,
Pence?
dude. The guy is a whack. He
Well-
is. There is an aspect of his personality, right, that is a field of what I would think normal, average Americans are.
Yeah, but you just haven't hung around with a bunch of rural average
let me-
Americans.
He did a really good long form interview last week with the Dispatch, and I have to say that
I missed that.
It's a good one. You ought to listen to it.
well, and
Okay.
what I enjoyed about it is that a lot of politicians have such canned responses for everything that you almost have to talk to them for more than 25 minutes before they start sounding like a normal person.
Yeah,
So-
that makes sense.
I mean, so that's why, like, even the
He froze. For everybody.
it's when they start really digging in towards the last, 2/3 of the interview, where you say like, "Oh, this is who Mike Pence is," right?
Oh, I got to listen to it. So thank you for that.
You're sort of like, "Oh, this is the guy I've heard people describe," and why they say he is this way and stuff.
I
Because
know, boy, this is my most
Everybody is-
convoluted interview I've had. So
But
we
it
have
does
spoken.
relate to- but I want to bring it
Okay.
back around to presidential
Thank you.
politics. The reason why this is actually pretty important is that when you think about what my advice was, what I want you to do is to try to overcome just name recognition.
Yeah,
You know,
excellent.
and try to get to that sort of next level. And I can tell you, most people wouldn't even think of voting for Mike Pence. They're like, "Oh, he's going to lose to Trump anyway." And I've heard of Trump, and I don't know Pence, this, whatever. And like get to the point where you actually listen to a long form interview, so that you can get beyond the sort of canned responses that they give. Because I mean, one of the reasons why I think people like Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump is because they are unscripted, and
Yeah.
there is an authenticity to both figures.
A lot of truth to that. Yeah.
Because we're so used to and turned off by, I mean, essentially the politicians as bad actors who repeat themselves.
Yeah, horrible. They are really bad actors. True.
And that's one of the
The other
reasons
thing-
why.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, there are certain politicians who, under a little more scrutiny, you don't think to yourself, "Oh, these people are amazing and I agree with them 100%." But you do come to understand, you understand their flaws, and you can start ranking their kind of, well, this person's a wacko, but that's probably more of a trade-off than a flaw. Because that's the other thing, a lot of personality, what I would say are flaws, are not necessarily flaws when we're hiring. The example of this I sometimes give is like Curtis LeMay was a lunatic, and there's no way that Curtis LeMay should have ever been president of the United States. But
Right.
the question is, how do you create the all-jet Air Force? And in the 1950s and 60s, the guy was a genius.
Right.
You're like, but just because he's good at creating an Air Force doesn't mean you should make him president, right?
Or even the moral dilemma whether he was the right type of human being.
Yeah, exactly.
I want to retract only one thing. I said Pence was a whack. He's not, and actually earned a level of respect from me on January 6th.
Sure.
The way that he handled that, I thought was admirable, and it made me think maybe he is potentially a good president.
And probably still handling it, by the way, even though I think he should have just come clean in an authentic book. But the way he did it, protecting the checks and balances and the authority of each branch of government. And then the day after, he didn't appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court. He could have. But now he just went and testified. So maybe, I don't know, maybe he's right.
The crazy thing, and I'll leave it to some future historian to do this kind of work, but one of the things that was interesting about the Trump administration is that you had these little pockets of competence that were doing incredible work. And you realize, like, when you have someone who is corrupt and incompetent people will take advantage of that system, but so will honest and competent people, because they'll say, oh, President Trump does not care about this at all. Let's use this as an opportunity to actually do some good work, because he is not paying attention to what we're doing here.
Professor, I really appreciate you saying that, because I have some dear acquaintances. I don't think I have a dear friend, but a close acquaintance or two that worked in the Trump administration that I abhorred. And I want to provide them grace. I really do. And they were in positions where they didn't have to deal with the president directly, and they just did their work, and they're honorable people. And that provides me more elbow room to admire them.
Well, and I always just say, like, there was a moral decision that I made, and I fell on one side of this divide instead of the other. But I have a hard time, working up a hatred when it was a coin flip for me. And ultimately I decided, well, I just don't want to have to pretend. And this is going to put me in a position where I'm going to have to pretend. But there are a lot of other people who, when we would talk and say, listen, he wants us to do something stupid, and essentially making the argument, it's no different from what you do at your work. I mean, it's true. Every one of us, doesn't get to exercise our perfect morality at our jobs. My boss makes me do things that I think of as being stupid, and I guess in a sense.
And put that on the record. Let's put this on Facebook. Let's put that. Professor Stephen Tootle, my boss makes me do things that I think are stupid. Let's do that today.
Well, I'm going to attend. I'll give you a concrete example. Right after this is over, my next meeting is a department meeting where I'm going to have to. We're going to sit there and pretend like we're interested in how to achieve technical compliance with this set of rules, and that no one really cares about. And we're all going to just pretend that this is important and good, and that it has something to do with education. And if you were to ask me honestly, does this have anything? And I would just say, no, this is a giant waste of time.
Let's make sure tenure laws in California are secure, because I moved to strike the last 2 minutes.
But I think if you hooked every single person in that room up to a lie detector and you asked them, do you actually think that what we're doing here today in any way contributes to student learning? And every single person would say no.
Okay, Professor, now I'll interrupt you again.
Yeah, sorry.
I am confident now that you agree that I'm a lousy facilitator on the history of presidential campaigns, where the last 5 or 10 minutes have been.
Yeah,
agree or disagree?
You want me to bring it back? You want me to just start going through some?
No, I want you to do something. I think this is important for potential listeners. I would like you to provide some grace, because you did a lot for Mike Pence. I'd like you to provide, and you might gulp at this. I'm gonna watch your nonverbals in this. And for people on Spotify, you can also see this on YouTube. I want you to provide some grace for Joe Biden. I want you to talk. I mean, we talked about whether Mike Pence is a legitimate presidential candidate. I'd like you to provide some grace to Joe Biden.
Okay. What do you want to hear? What's good about him?
Anything you'd like.
Oh, there are a lot of good things about Joe Biden. I think he's generally a decent person and patriotic. I would say he is bad in a normal and conventional democratic way. That even when I vehemently disagree with his outlook and his way of doing things, I think he's often sincere, and often when he does things that are hypocritical or insincere, I think even then he's probably just because, he's I don't know, a little bit delusional and willing to overlook some of his own biases. I would say that his foreign policy, one of the best things that he has done is that even though his foreign policy decisions have in many cases been incorrect, they were at least coherent, meaning that at least they're trying to have a coherent foreign policy for the United States of America, meaning, you know, they have people who issue statements with subject verb agreement that our allies can understand what the policy of the United States is. And it's just so important for us to have those things, just so that just the sort of technical competence of being able to send trade representatives to meetings to negotiate with our allies, and having people show up, speak in complete sentences, have contracts and treaties and policies that are, again, even if I disagree with them, they have paragraphs. And
But you're not just talking, I know you're saying grammar and sentence structure, but you're talking about something deeper. I mean, it is the power of the United States is maybe not just supreme anymore, but it is sure as heck influential. What the United States says is important. And you're saying that that's important, that it's cohesive. It's deep. It's deeper than grammar and sentence structure. It is the full weight and measure of the United States, right? I mean,
but also like the cost of our incompetence creates a vacuum that bad people can step into. You know, because if you're Australia or New Zealand or, you know, Indonesia or something like that, and you would love to make a trade agreement with the United States because the United States is a stable economy and a more powerful.
It's still 25% of the GDP.
That's where you want to go. But you also have, you know, if you're in New Zealand, you've got wool that you need to sell on the international market. And if you can't get a contract with the United States, you're going to say, well, I guess I have to sell it to the Chinese. You know, like, and you just, because ultimately, like, you're just like, our farmers have to get rid of their wool, you know,
there'll be more next year.
Our dairy cows, that milk's got to go somewhere, you know. And if you're, you know, if you're from Chile and you've got some grapes you need to get rid of, like, if the United States just can't even sign the agreement or show up to the meeting, or you can't figure out what the United States is even doing, then other countries that don't have our best interests at heart, to say the least, will always step into that power vacuum created by incoherence and incompetence.
So that was all your compliment on Joe Biden. Any other one-liners?
I mean, I guess it's hard for me because my list of things that are bad is pretty long, but
I know that's why I put it on the spot.
But I think the biggest and most important thing that Joe Biden did as president is that he acted at least as normal as, and maybe even more normal than President Obama, but he was somewhere on the Obama scale of normal.
Right. But you're saying that not kind of a slight dig, but mostly it's an authentic compliment.
Well, I mean, there are these just high profile examples of times when I think Obama and Biden did things that were as bad as Trump. Because they aren't stupid, they get somehow forgiven for them because the people agree with the policy ends, you know.
Yeah.
But if you think about like what Joe Biden did with student loans, that's as bad as almost anything Trump did.
Yeah. I mean, Congress could do it. Congress could do what they want to do, but the president can't unilaterally do that.
Yeah, and I don't know, this is a kind of an underreported story, but what they're trying to do now with home mortgages is just such an abuse of executive power and it's a terrible idea. Like I just, it's just, he's, I'm acting like a dictator, and it's just horrible policy, right?
Yeah. Okay. So we're
Anyway, sorry.
we're on the same page. I do have a motion on the floor that should be recognized that this is
Okay.
the single-handed worst interviewee, me, that we've had in over 58 shows. This is so all in favor, please say aye, aye. Okay, seeing it was unanimous, thank you. Okay, cool. Professor.
My fault for not answering the questions you asked.
I know, yeah. Well, the authority of the chair. It's a constitutional republic, not a democracy. So,
Yeah.
so Professor, we have very limited minutes left. And this was great. I really appreciate you taking me into a realm that truly I've never thought of in my entire life. 60, 70, 80 years, I don't know what it was. I've never paid any attention to that. I just figured that the war was over, Civil War, and FDR came along and made things liberal. Seriously, that's, I don't know. I don't know what happened, but that's kind of what I learned in school. And that's what I figured. No one else is paying attention. I might as well keep moving on with my life and pay my mortgage. And, seriously, so this was really interesting to me. But will you do a high level now, just because we don't have any time, a high level approach of, the campaign for Washington was, President Washington was a big deal. Or no, the next one was. I mean, if we were to read a book, no one will ever listen to the show and read a book. If they do, I'll pay $10 to every person that documents that to me somehow. It just won't happen. But if they do, and they want $10, they should read a book on the campaign of blank, 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 and blank. You can take 3 to 5. What should we as citizens in 2000, in this century at least, I don't care if it's this year, but we should pay attention to a couple of the elections because it will give us insights on how to be a better citizen today. That's what I want to know. Was it the first election, Washington, or was it Lincoln?
Well, we didn't really have campaigns at that time. So
well, talk about that then. Tell it.
Oh, sorry. So first couple presidents were selected. Essentially every state has complete control. This is why we have an electoral college. Every state is given complete control over how to conduct presidential elections. And
Will you say that again?
Every
Do
state,
average citizens know that?
I don't know, probably not. The average citizen doesn't know we have 3 branches of government. Just always keep that in mind, right? 2/3 of Americans don't know the 3 branches of government. So yeah, of course they don't know how the electoral college functions.
And we're not insulting them. We're encouraging them to spend some time.
Yeah. But so the way the system is set up is so that to maintain the fact that the states run our presidential election system, the electoral college exists so that it can so that each state can do whatever they want and then translate it into this common thing, electoral votes that are awarded to each state based on population with a minimum representation for small states of 3. So anyway, so in those first elections, most states didn't have procedures. They just for popular election, even of the president. So it was state legislatures who voted on their electoral votes. So George Washington was, what's that?
So I have a lot of experience in this. Active citizens helping to support individual legislators probably had an undue influence on how that, the people that were the treasurer and the campaign manager and the husband and the spouse and people that were interested in that could tell their state legislator who they wanted for president. But it was a very small amount of people that helped advise that legislator.
Well, and every state had their own, it still does have their own laws about who can vote and what the qualifications for voting are. And in most cases it was property, but not in every case. So essentially what happened is in that first 20 or 30 years, eventually the property qualification starts to go away, and eventually most people can vote directly for who they would like to be president. And so the first
You mean
president,
most minus black and women, but sorry to be a
well,
jerk.
but you remember that's an expansion of the franchise, not a contraction, because black people and women could vote when it was property, but only if they own property. But
Right.
allowing poor people to vote meant that what they did was they would then change voting laws to conform to what the majority of people were, which would be most heads of household at the time would have been male and white. So it became white male because that's who the majority of householders were, whether they owned land or not. So it was
Do you
not.
take umbrage at my jab at you, or do you?
Well, I
think
just
it's
always,
important?
people say this a lot without really thinking about it, because they think about this era as being a contraction of who could vote, but it was not. It was an
Right, okay.
extension of who could vote.
Well, I concur with you on that.
Yeah.
But it does. Gosh, this is the worst interview I've ever done. Sorry.
All right.
If I was a woman or a black when I'm listening to you, and I'm not, so I'm just trying to have project empathy for the early years of the presidential, I would go, man, I don't have much or any ability to control my life, and as far as politics goes.
I mean, it would have depended on what state you were in.
Okay. I love that nuance, by the way. I love that nuance because I don't think enough attention has been paid to
But that
that
becomes an important point later on
Yeah.
when Southerners try to make the case, and the Dred Scott decision says that black people should have never been citizens. You say, well, that's absurd. They voted for the Constitution. So how can anyway, that yet another reason why the Dred Scott decision was terrible. But if you have black people and women who could vote and did vote at the time that the United States was created, it meant that black people and women were citizens and recognized as citizens at the time of the creation of the country. So anyway,
thank you.
Yeah.
Keep going.
So the franchise is expanded so that the majority of people can vote for the first time, sort of 1830s, 1840s. And certainly by the time you have the 1850s, it's a popular election of the president almost everywhere, and usually male head of household. The campaigns of that time were what we would think of as being sort of proper campaigns, with one maybe potential exception, and that is that the candidates themselves didn't really run for office. Everything was done on their behalf. So you were expected to sort of not do anything, and other people would.
I'm sorry, this is new to me. What does that mean?
Well, it means that Ulysses S. Grant didn't run for president. He allowed other people to place his name in nomination and try to get him elected, but he didn't do anything.
Ulysses didn't go on the train or by horseback. He didn't shake hands and kiss babies.
No, it was even seen as unseemly and weird when people did it. So one of the people to do this was Andrew Johnson. He was one of the first people to campaign for office, and everybody said, "Look, who is this lunatic? What's he doing? This is a dangerous thing."
So Professor, and admittedly, I've been an average student. In 6th grade, I was great, actually. I had 4 A's and 2 B's and good E for effort. But after 6th grade, I've been a lousy student. I have. And I'm old enough now where I can tell the truth. I'm not looking for your job or your approval or whatever. But in junior high school, college, and law school, I was a lousy student. So this shouldn't shock you, I guess, because I'm a lousy student. But I truly am shocked that presidential candidates into the era that you're talking about didn't campaign. I just thought they always campaigned. That's what you do in America. So I'm just ignorant, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it was but you can't know something if you weren't taught, and your teachers can't teach it to you if they didn't know it either. And people just sort of assume that things in the past happened kind of like things happen now. If you don't know, if you never go back and study it, your brain just kind of fills in the blanks and says,
so you're being kind to me, Bart.
Yes.
You wrote laws for the state of Colorado for 30 or 40 years. I don't know how old you are, but a long time, 30 years. Is this kind of news to you about how presidential campaigns went? Or no, you knew this?
I knew what Professor Tootle is talking about right now, yes, the modern campaign that we are so familiar with
Yeah,
is relatively new. I guess maybe, Stephen, it goes back to maybe the end of the 19th century.
Yeah, sort of. I mean, you get sort of, most people would say like, well, by the time we get to the McKinley era, you know, and then certainly Theodore Roosevelt is campaigning for
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
right.
stop
I
it.
remember that.
And Woodrow Wilson certainly campaigned for office. So by
Right.
1912, you'd say it's definitely on, but it was an evolutionary process up to that point.
Right. Let me, I have a quick suggestion of elections that are kind of analogous to the period of time. Well, they're not analogous, but they are elections that it's worth people today thinking about. Okay. If you look at the elections between Eisenhower and Adlai Stevenson, and there were two of them for president, because Stevenson ran twice and so did Eisenhower. If you look at those elections in that period of time, the country was somewhat evenly divided. In fact, you might argue that it was more Democratic, I guess, at that point than Republican.
Mhm.
But Eisenhower won both of those elections. And this was, this is kind of taking it out of the context that you were just talking to Stephen about, which is how campaigns have changed and all of that. The reality is Eisenhower and Stevenson, they barnstormed the country, sometimes on trains, sometimes on planes, whatever. But if you look at what's going on today, we're kind of in a similar thing. We just have different characters that are at the top of the parties. You've got Donald Trump on one side, you've got Joe Biden on the other, although Biden, I would argue, is kind of nominally on top of his party. I think he's there because he's the president and no one's going to kick him out in his party. He may not be the nominee next year. We're going to have to see how this all plays out. I mean, Biden is older, blah, blah, blah. My belief is that in the end, Donald Trump is not going to be the nominee of the Republican Party next year. I think right now it appears that he will be, but a whole lot of stuff is going to happen between now and then. And I don't know, but we're in a period of time where I think looking at the elections in the 1950s might be a better comparison for people in the modern era.
And
and I
so,
think this historical stuff is great. Because Stephen is right. If you look back at the 19th century, a lot of those presidents were really important and they've been overlooked. And a lot of the campaigns, even from back then, in terms of the issues people were talking about, were really, really important. You had people talking about child labor and prohibition. I mean, the equivalent issue today for abortion in the 21st century is prohibition during the 19th century. You actually had some pretty amazing presidents who were in favor of banning all alcohol. Well, that ended up being the dumbest decision we ever made. When you think about it, it's like we did it and everybody went, holy crap, what is this? We didn't realize we could never drink. It's like that wasn't part of the equation. Well, yeah, it actually was. But I mean, if you look at some of these issues, I think there are parallels to the period of time we're in right now.
what do you think, Professor? We're almost out of time. Sorry to interrupt you, Bart. That was a great ad.
Okay.
So,
Yeah,
Professor, you got to take what Bart said and wrap us up for the day.
Okay. I wish that the next election was like the 1952 and 1956 election. That would be fantastic, because one of the reasons why Eisenhower decided to run in 1952 was because he believed he had to save the Republican Party and two-party government in the United States, because he was so shocked that Truman managed to win in 48, being as incompetent and bombastic as he was. We remember him as kind of this, like, give him hell Harry, and we think of it as being cute. But if you go back and read his speeches from 1948, it wasn't cute. He was calling his political opponents Nazis and saying that they're going to bring about, fascism and all that. I mean, he was wild. And so Eisenhower really thought that Truman's policies in the Cold War were dangerous for the long-term safety of the United States, not because they were not doing enough to challenge the Soviets, because he thought it was going to bankrupt the United States to follow those bad policies with no financial limits. So we would have, you know, kind of that we were going to go bankrupt and turn the United States into a garrison state if we continue to have Democrats running national security policy. But the two people who were running for office, Stevenson and Eisenhower, I always thought it was, you know, Stevenson had a good sense of humor about himself and knew that he was going to lose. And he said, you know, all I have to do is convince the American people that they need to be saved from Mike Eisenhower. You know, that's all. You know, the most trusted man in America. I just have to convince Americans not to trust him, you know. So he knew he was going to lose. But I would also say that one of the things that is remarkable is that out of a sense of duty, out of a sense of responsibility to representative government, Eisenhower decided to run for president. And in many ways, he might have saved the republic. He might have given, you know, given us another 50 years of America by making that decision. I hope that we have that kind of candidate. And I would also say that Adlai Stevenson did represent the center of the Democratic Party at the time and the best instincts of the Democratic Party. Again, I would have disagreed with a lot of the things he was advocating, and but at the same time, you'd say he was a public-spirited, motivated individual, and in many ways was doing a really competent job of representing the vast majority of the American people. And what I've found frustrating about the last few election cycles, let's say since the sort of 2000s, is that we have candidates who do not represent the vast majority of Americans, and that disconnect is something that is kind of dangerous over the long term. And that's why, I mean, if you think about it from Eisenhower's perspective, running in 1952, that's why he felt like he had to run, because you had Roosevelt, and you know, and then Truman manages to win after that. And it's like, we need to save the country first. Otherwise, you're just going to have a sort of permanent one-party state. And what would be fantastic is if we had some sort of publicly minded individual who decided that the country needed saving and managed to do what Eisenhower did in 1952.
That's the way to end. Thank you, Professor. So Tony and Bart, there was at least three semi-remarkable, not quotes, but paragraphs from the professor today. And if you'll just ponder listening to part of this again, and then like maybe sharing on social media, you know, I don't know. We should probably do a blog on this conversation, because this almost more than any other conversation, Professor, surprised me. Because I thought we would kind of talk about Lincoln and Washington or FDR.
Well, I'm prepared to do all that. I mean, actually, officially, this is what allegedly I'm an expert in. So so we can. I'm willing to go as far as you want on any any election, you name it. I'm game.
Yeah, and so I'm just pleasantly surprised at age 56. I learned a ton today. So much so that I don't even know the right questions to ask. You know, it's almost like exploring a different planet. And I have a political science and a law degree. And I've spent a profession, and you know, I paid the mortgage by thinking about these things. And I just go, oh my gosh, I do not know. Wow. I wonder what I do need to know in order to make a more powerful difference today. That's what I'm really interested in, because I care about me. Sorry to be selfish, but I care about my kids, and I care about our neighborhood, your kids. You know, how do we make a difference?
Well, I as we said, probably in an episode maybe a year or two ago, but when we were talking about CRT, like the doctrinaire CRT is wrong, but it is true that people have no idea how much racism and the defense of racism has altered not just our political history, but even how we remember our political history.
And you've alluded to that. That's the fourth or fifth cut quote we need, Tony or Bart, whoever, if Jake will come in and listen to this conversation, he's probably the best out of all of us that will. It's really important stuff, Professor. It really is.
But I would say the reason why it's not flattering to anyone now is that the same people who claim to care about racism also want to defend the legacy of progressivism. And so, like, neither side wants this to be true.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't flatter the contemporary political needs of either of the two quote unquote sides. So, that's why
We're playing a small role. I know it's only an hour a week, but instead of 45 minutes in their lifetime or every 2 years, but we're playing a small role. And for that, I don't know if it's 5 or 10 or 500 or 5,000 people that listen to us in whatever way they can find us. But the bottom line is we're doing our best to try to make a difference. Professor, thank you for that. And we'll see you next Friday, or we've got conflicts.
Well, turn off the recording. I have something I can tell you.
Yeah. All right. Thank you all. You'll see us.
Well,
We have a
they
lot.
can listen. It's not secret. I just don't want it to go on the internet.
Well, yeah, but if it was like I have a date or something, I don't want.
No. But yeah, stop the recording. I'll tell you guys.
Stop. The recording stopped.
Have a great day, all.
So I was doing a review of this book called Myth of Right and Left for National Review.
Wait, hold on. Tony, are we off on everything? You had us on like 3 things today.
Yeah, because when I turn off the live, at YouTube, that was what was live on all the other channels. So live YouTube is gone.
So we're not on Facebook anymore.
Not on
We're not on Spotify. We're not on YouTube.
All right.
We're not on
Okay.
anything.
Yeah,
We're not on Zoom.
This is
Tony,
inside
are we
the
totally
basement.
off?
Well, we couldn't be on Zoom and you see me.
Yeah.
We're only on Zoom.
Okay.
Only
Well,
on
fair
Zoom.
enough. But is it recording on Zoom? So then
No.
when we
Well,
upload to something
It's not
else.
that big of a. This isn't a national secret.
No,
right?
no. So
Well,
it's-
no, I just need to know, Professor. I never want to make anyone look bad.
no,
But
Yeah,
no,
yeah,
no. So
So,
John, this is still being recorded on Zoom. We're still on Zoom. It's still recording. And when
that goes to YouTube.
no, right. Yes, I upload it to YouTube. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, just so you know, Professor, this is still live. But go ahead now.
But I can
Well, it's
stop it.
Okay.